Okay, we're at Masechet Eruvin, Daf Saditet, page 99, at the Mishnah on the previous daf. And let's begin. Omed Adam Birshut HaYachid umetaltel Birshut HaRabim, Birshut HaRabim umetaltel Birshut HaYachid. ובלבד שלא יוציא חוץ מארבע אמות. So it's all my cases of remote control where I'm in one domain and I'm moving things in another domain. So this continues on a theme we've already started in previous Mishnayot. For example, the scroll that rolls out, I'm still holding on to it. I want to pull it back in. So in this case, I'm inside my house and I have my hand out and I'm moving something out the window which is the street, or the other way around. That is okay, as long as you don't move it for amot, right? So in other words, it's the same as if you were actually, in that area. Even though you're inside, you still can't move more than 4 amot outside. But if it's less than that, it's okay. Now, lo ya'amod adam b'shut ha'yachid v'yashtin b'shut harabim, b'shut harabim v'yashtin b'shut ha'yachid, v'chen lo yarok. A person should not be inside his house and urinate outside. Nobody would do this today because we have indoor plumbing. But in those days, this would have been more common. And the reason is not just because it's not polite, but because it would be carrying. You're causing that the urine to move, a significant amount outside or outside to inside. Not only are you moving it outside, you're actually transferring from one domain to the other by doing that. It's like taking a ball inside and throwing it out, which would be similarly prohibited. Also, spitting from inside to outside, you're transferring from one domain to the other. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, all that is Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af mi shenitlash ruko befiv, lo yehalech arba amot ad sheyarok. Rabbi Yehuda has another stringency regarding saliva, which is that once, if you're walking and you have some saliva in your mouth that kind of builds up, then you should not continue walking until you spit it out. In other words, you can be carrying, even if it's your own saliva, right? If it's a bit of a buildup there, accumulation that you wouldn't want to be there, you'd want to spit out. This kind of question comes up. Everybody asks about fast days, right? Can you swallow your own saliva? So generally, yes, it's part of your body, right? But when it accumulates and you don't want it there, then maybe not. And so that would be carrying for amot in the Shut Harabim. Okay, so we'll see some interesting variations and cases come up on this. So we start at the beginning. Matni le Rav Chinana bar Shelamya lechia barav kame derav. So we have Rav was the Gadol Hador. He was the greatest Amora in Bavel in the first generation of Amoraim, and his son, he had a son Chia, was being taught by Rav Chinana. The thing is that Rav Chinana, so he kind of hired this, as a tutor for his son, except that Rav was also there, he was also present, which puts a lot of pressure on Rav Chinana. Imagine if someone, the Gadol Hador hires you to be the tutor for his child, and then he sits in the room, right? So it could be a lot of pressure there. So Rav Chinana is teaching Rav's son Mishnayot, and Rav is present. So Rav Chinana teaches this Mishnah, and he says, Lo ya'amod, instead of Omed Adam, that you are allowed to move something in a different domain, and that we said, the Mishnah says it's not considered transferring one domain to the other because you're not moving the item from outside to inside, you're just moving it outside or the other way around. So Mishnah says that's okay. But he had a different version. He says, Lo yamod, the opposite. Adam b'shut ha'echid metaltel b'shut harabim. You should not remote control something from inside to outside or vice versa. That is in some way transferring. Amar le shevat rabanan ve'abadet ke'Rabbi Meir. So Rav hears that and says, oh, what are you doing? Are you ignoring the opinion of the majority of the rabbis and following the minority opinion of Rabbi Meir? Well, what is he talking about? There's no Rabbi Meir here in this Mishnah. He's referring to a upcoming Mishnah on the next daf, which is, I brought it for you here. This one says, a person should not stand in the private domain and open v'iftach b'reshut harabim, and open a door that's in the public domain, or the other way around, unless he encloses it. So this is the words of the Rabbi Meir. In other words, according to the Rabbi Meir, you should not stick your hand out, and somehow open the door from inside to outside, or the other way around. So the Rabbi Meir is the one that is stringent regarding remote control. That's the Rabbi Meir. That's what he's talking about. And the sages there said, no, we always do that, and that's totally fine. So in this case, Rav Chinena was teaching a law in accordance with the Rabbi Meir that says remote control is not allowed. And so Rav says, what are you doing? Are you ignoring the majority opinion, and now you're changing it to be like the Rabbi Meir? So, what was he thinking? Who savar midesefar Rabbi Meir, shanameh Rabbi Meir. So it must be Rabbi Chinena. He saw the Mishnayot as in order, and he saw that the later Mishnah about the door is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So he assumed that must be that this previous Mishnah also is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and therefore, when it says Omed, it must be Lo Omed. In other words, based on the structure of the Mishnah, perhaps he had a Braita also to back him up. He assumed that you have to add the word law and say it should not be so. But in fact, the proper version of the Mishnah is not so, but rather as we have it. And later on is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who's stringent, but our opinion here is lenient. And so that's the story. So the father was able here to correct the teacher. Okay, this is an important example because it shows that sometimes there were multiple versions of a Mishnah, right? Because he's teaching them in the Mishnah. And so, did Rabbi Chinena have a different version of this? Did he change it based on another Baraita or based on logic, right? Something like that is what Professor Yaakov Nachum Epstein says in this case. So you see a hint of these other versions, and Rav is only listening, but he's correcting him and saying, no, this is the proper version to follow. Okay, good. Now, with yosi chutz. So we said it's okay to have remote control from inside to outside, as long as you don't actually transfer an item from one domain to the other. Okay, now what if you do? Hahotzi chayav chatat. If you do, then you would be chayav chatat. Asur midoraita. Okay, lema mesaya le Rabba damar Rabba ma'abir chefetz mitchilat arba lesof arba ve'biro derech alav hayav. So this would seem to support the opinion of Rava. Rava was talking about a case where you move something 4 amot in the Shut Harabim, but it's derech alav. It's two opinions what this means. Rashi says it means you're lifting it up above 10 tefachim, moving it, and then putting it down. So the point is that you're not really transferring within the Shut Harabim. It's just that you are uprooting it in the Shut Harabim, transferring it in a different domain, and then putting it back down. And so according to Rava Chayav, because you picked it up, and now you put it down in 4 amot apart. It doesn't really matter if you did the transferring. That's one opinion. Tosafot says it means derech alav means in front of you. It means that you don't move, but you pick it up with your left hand all the way here and move it, transfer your right hand, and then put it down all the way over there. And so you can actually move something 4 amot without yourself moving, and that would still be chayav. That second opinion of Tosafot seems to make more sense here because the case here is let's say I'm inside and I'm reaching out of my window and then causing something to move outside, which is more like Tosafot. Rashi here has to say that maybe he's on his roof and he's moving something and picking it up and putting it down. Okay, either way, this would seem to support Rava, wouldn't it? And we say, no, not necessarily. The Mishnah simply said, as long as you don't move it 4 amot, so it means you shouldn't do it. It doesn't say, if you do it, then you're chayav. Maybe it just says, if you do it, you're patur aval asur midrabanan. So therefore, it's not necessarily a proof for Rava. It's not a disproof, but it can't be used as a proof for Rava. Okay, that's one version of that sugya. And now we're going to flip everything around, but the same order. It seems that they remembered a kind of structure, but which way it was arguing has a different version. Ika de amre, others teach the sugya as follows. Hahotzi patur aval asur. Since the Mishnah says you should not transfer from inside when you're inside. You should not move something outside for amot. If you did, then only asur midrabanan. So this should be a challenge to Rava, because Rava said he said a similar case of moving something where you're stationary and you're causing it to move is chayav. And so according to our Mishnah, we just said no, patur aval asur. So we say, no, it's not a challenge. Maybe the Mishnah means if he did, he's chayav chatat, and that would therefore be in accordance with Rava. Okay, so we actually don't know. We can infer either way from the Mishnah. One way will be a challenge. One will be a proof for Rava, but neither one works. So we leave it open. All right, the next section of the Mishnah says, Lo yamod adam b'shut hayachid, and a person should not urinate or spit from his home out into the street, because then he's transferring. Amar Rav Yosef, hishtin verak chayav chatat. Rav Yosef adds, Mishnah just says don't do it, but Rav Yosef adds, and if you do it, it's chayav midoraita. That's full-fledged carrying. Okay. We hold on, Rav Yosef. Why are you saying chayav chatat? There's a general rule. In order to be chayav for transferring, you have to pick it up from an area that's 4x4, pick it up, move it, and then put it down onto an area that's 4x4. It has to be a significant uprooting and significant placing down. And in this case, we don't have that because the person's mouth is not 4x4 wide. A person's body, his bladder or his male member is not 4x4 wide. And so it's not being lifted off of a significant spot, and therefore should not fit into the category and not be chayav chatat. That's the question. The answer, machshavto meshavya le makom. Well, his mind can make it an area of significance. The whole point of 4x4 is that it should be a significant place. It's set down. I am uprooting it. But if it's something that I consider significant, and my mouth I consider significant as its own area, then that is sufficient. זרק ונח בפי הכלב או בפי הכבשן, חייב חטאת, והבן הנחה על גבי מקום ארבעה ולקה. And they'll bring a proof that this is so. Rava said, let's say I'm playing catch with my dog, and so I throw a ball to the dog and he catches it with his mouth. He says that's chayav chatat. But why? He caught it with his mouth, and his mouth is not a 4x4 platform. Doesn't matter. That's what I intended. I intended to play catch, and that's what that's the spot that was important to me. So that makes it important. That makes it like it's 4x4. Or if I want to throw something into the fire, well, besides burning, that would be chayav. But ignoring that, right? Even though it's not landing on a spot 4x4 because it's going to get burnt up in the fire, but since I want it to be there, that is considered actually putting it down on a significant area. So ela machshavot meshavia lemakom hachiname machshava meshavia lemakom. So just like there, even though I don't have 4x4, if it's a significant area, it's considered as if it is. So too here. Okay, so that solves that problem. And now one more question regarding this urinating. Hu b'reshut hayachid ufi ama b'reshut rabim mahu. Batar akira azlinan or batar yisya azlinan tekum. All right, interesting case. You never know what surprises come up in Daf Yomi. A person's inside his house and he puts his male member, the tip of his male member, out the window. So what do we say in that case? Do you follow the place of the origin? In other words, when someone's bladder, which is totally inside the house, and then therefore the urine is transferring, you're causing it to transfer from the reshut hayachid to the reshut rabim, inside to outside, and therefore chayav? Or do you go from the spot where it actually leaves the body, which is only the tip of the member, and that's already outside in the reshut rabim, and therefore it's not transferring from inside to outside? And this question is left standing. All right, like the guy who's also standing. All right, interesting question. And but we go to the next section. Vechen lo yarok. Also, one should not spit from inside to outside. Rabbi Yehuda Omed, and so on. Rabbi Yehuda says if you're walking, right, and you accumulate some saliva in your mouth that you don't want to be there and you want to spit it out, then you got to stop. You can't continue walking. By carrying it 4 amot, your saliva that accumulated is considered something carrying. Okay, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. That's a pretty stringent opinion. Now we ask about that. Hold on. Even if he doesn't turn the saliva around in his mouth, in other words, just if it accumulates, and then we're getting very, very fine pointed here, right? Only if it accumulates and not until he swishes it around in his mouth, right? At what point of accumulation? Well, this we're going to compare it to another case. היה אוכל דבלה בידיים מסועבות, והכניס ידו לתוך פיו ליטול שרור, רבי מאיר מטמא, ורבי יוסי מטהר. רבי יהודה אומר, היפך בה טמא, לא היפך בה tahor. Okay, the case is where I'm eating this fig cake, right? This like a fruit roll up they used to make, and with my hands unwashed. And let's say it's tiruma. Kohen's eating it, and it's tiruma. His hands are unwashed. Now the law regarding tuma is something only receives tum'ah if it becomes wet. So as long as it's dry, it will not transfer. So even though he didn't wash his hands, and his hands therefore have tum'ah on them, but because they're dry, they won't transfer tum'ah to the food that he's eating. Here's the problem. They did become wet because he had something stuck in his teeth, and he put his finger into his mouth in order to dislodge that thing. And so now they got wet. His hand got wet with saliva, and now that hand is going to touch the other hand, right? And it's tameh. And the question is, does that then transfer the tumah to the figs that he's holding? Okay, so that's the question. Rabbi Meir says yes, it does make it tameh. Rabbi Yosef says no, that doesn't make it tameh. In other words, that little saliva in your mouth is not something that you consider significant. It's not like you want it to get wet. It's not considered anything. And Rabbi Yehuda makes a difference. He says if you had accumulated saliva that you swished around, then that becomes its own entity, and therefore that makes your hands tameh and the cake tameh. However, if it's just regular saliva that didn't accumulate and you didn't swish around yet, then it's not considered its own liquid, and therefore it does not make that person's hands tameh. Okay, all this, the point is that this is a question to the Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says any saliva, that accumulates in your mouth, is considered a separate entity, and therefore you're carrying. And the Mishnah over here regarding Tum'ah, you have to accumulate and swish it around in order for it to become its own entity, right? So he's more lenient in the Mishnah regarding Tum'ah. So that's the question, the contradiction between these two Mishnayot of Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to have two answers. Number one is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, Mukhlefet Hashita. Rabbi Yochanan says, the best thing to do here is reverse the opinions in this Mishnah. I know it's Rabbi Yehuda, you have Rabbi Yehuda saying, making this distinction, actually switch around Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and say that Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says tameh all the time. Even if you didn't swish it around, any accumulated saliva in your mouth is considered its own liquid, and that would then therefore match our Mishnah that any accumulated saliva is considered carrying. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion to change the version of the Mishnah. Resh Lakish amar leolam lo tachlif. Resh Lakish says, no, don't switch it around, but rather here in our Mishnah, we're not talking about simply saliva, but rather phlegm. Phlegm, nobody ever wants in their mouth. That's always a separate entity because you wanna spit it out. By the way, isn't phlegm a fantastic word, right? Especially the way it's spelled. Really, but just to say the word, you have to bring up phlegm. Also in Hebrew, right? Right, you're already half choking by the time you say the word. Okay, they're both fantastic onomatopoeias. Okay, so since therefore that's the way to resolve the Mishnayot. Our Mishnah is talking about some phlegm in his mouth, and that's considered a separate liquid no matter what, even if you're not swirling it around, and you got to spit it out, otherwise it's carrying. And the Mishnah regarding Tumah is talking about just regular saliva. And so therefore the Biuda says regular saliva, only when you swish it around, then it becomes a separate liquid. All right, so this would seem to work, but we have to, it might not work with the following baraita. Hatanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kichov v'nitlash. So my love, Rok v'nitlash, there's another baraita similar to our Mishnah that says, Kicho, if the phlegm became detached, right, in his separate in his mouth, then he can't walk anymore. So doesn't that mean saliva? Right, and then that would be a problem. Look, okay, that wasn't a difficult question because we said our Mishnah is talking about phlegm. So this baraita actually backs it up because it's also means talking about if you carry it, then it's no good. Okay, so that baraita is no problem, but the second one's going to be a problem. Vatanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ki choshen itlash, v'chen rukoshen itlash, lo yalech al ba'amot ad sheyarok. This is Rabbi Yehuda talking about the same case as our Mishnah, and says whether it's phlegm that became detached or saliva that became detached, one should not walk in 4 amot in the Shut Rabim until you spit it out because it's carrying. So, and therefore you can't say that our Mishnah is talking about phlegm and not saliva because this says phlegm or saliva. Rather, we cannot follow Resh Lakish. Although he tried to reconcile, it doesn't work. We have to say the first opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that we switch around the opinions, and that's the only way to reconcile it. Okay, good. Now, related topic, Madesh Lakish Kiach Bifne Rabo Chayav Mita. Well, since we're talking about spitting out phlegm, if someone does that in front of his teacher, this is very respectful, so disrespectful that the person is liable to penalty of death. Not that a court would actually do that. It's just saying it's that bad that he should be liable to that. Those who hate God, they like death, right? So don't say those who hate God, but those who make themselves hateful to me, right, by showing such disrespect for their teacher of Torah, so that they deserve death. Okay. Hold on, poor kid, poor student. What if he's a cold, an allergy? Sometimes you just cough up some phlegm. It's not involuntary. So no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about he actually spit it out in front of him. Go get a tissue, go to the bathroom. You don't have to spit it out right in front of someone. It's not nice to do that. Okay, so that's some good manners to teach the students. All right, and next Mishnah. Lo yamod adam b'rshut hayachid v'yishteh b'rshut harabim. B'rshut harabim v'yishteh b'rshut hayachid. אלא אם כן, הכניס ראשו ורבו למקום שהוא שותה, וכן בגת. Okay, so you shouldn't be in, let's say you're inside and someone brings a drink to outside your window, so you stick your head out and drink outside. Do not do that, right? We'll see why, right? Is that itself considered carrying? You're not actually moving anything. So we'll see. The Gemara will say it's a gezerah because if you're holding a cup outside the window and your head's outside the window, you may tend to end up bringing it in. It's hard to keep in that stance for very long. Same thing outside. You're walking by someone's house outside, and they say, "Hey, stick your head in and drink something." That's not allowed. Unless you bring your head and most of your body. So even if your legs are dangling out, as long as your head and most of your body are inside, you could drink inside. Outside, same thing. And similarly with a wine press. So wine press, that's where you're preparing the wine. And so it's in a big hole or barrel, and you want to lean over and drink some fresh wine from the press. And let's say you're in the Shut Harabim and you're leaning into the press, which is the Shut Hayachid, and drinking. It will be the same law. Okay, that's I'm interpreting Bechen Bagat in accordance with the same idea that's talking about Hilchot Shabbat, we're going to see in the Gemara is going to talk about a different interpretation of this phrase Vechen Bagat, that's talking about that you didn't separate Maaser yet, but you can drink temporarily. We'll see that in a minute. Okay, now the question is, hold on, the previous Mishnah was the opinion of Rabbanan, was lenient, and there it said you can stick your hand out and you can move something outside, or vice versa, and that's permitted. So this is the same case, isn't it? And yet here it says it's not permitted. So it sounds like this is Rabbi Meir, right? Like the next Mishnah that we're going to see, which is also Rabbi Meir prohibits. So, but this one has no name. The previous one had no name. So the previous one is allowed like Rabbanan, and this one is not allowed like Rabbi Meir with no names. All right. So this is strange. Amar Rav Yosef. B'chafetzin shesirichin lo v'dibrei hakol. Rav Yosef harmonizes them, and say actually both the previous Mishnah and this Mishnah are all the same opinion. It's all Rabbanan. And even though Rabbanan permit a person to stick his hand outside and to move a ball around, but if it comes to something that you need, that you want, like a drink, that he says everyone agrees is not okay. Why? Because it's something you want. So this drink, they say, oh, this really tastes good. And then you're going to end up, even though you're sticking your head outside and your hand outside, you're going to end up bringing it in. And so we have to we have to worry that a person will bring it in, and therefore don't even do that at all. Rather, go outside and you could drink it outside, but don't stick your head out. That's too dangerous. Okay, good. So now we understand why. Now, Ibaya lehu karmelit mai. That question we just talked about was I'm inside my house, a Shut Echid, and in the street is a Shut Rabim. It's a major thoroughfare. But what if it's not? What if it's a karmelit? Right? What if it's just a garden or something? So therefore, even if I would transfer, it would only be the Rabbanan. So do we still say that I cannot stick my head outside and drink from a Reshut Echid to karmelit? Where even if I would bring it inside, it would only be the Rabbanan, so there's less reason to make such a gezerah. We have two opinions. Amar Abaye, it's the same thing, right? And you still have to worry, still not allowed, because it's very likely the person is going to bring the drink inside and violated Rabbanan, which is still we don't want him to do. Amar Rava, kufa gezerah. This is what you're talking about. The whole thing, the whole point of karmelit. Karmelit itself is a gezerah, because you might confuse it with Reshut Rabim. And so now we should make a gezerah on top of a gezerah. Don't drink from inside to outside because you might bring it in. And even if you do bring it in, it will be a karmelit, which is a gezerah to Reshut Rabim. We don't make a double gezerah, and therefore Rava says that would be permitted if the outside was a karmelit. Okay, now Abaye is going to challenge him. Mina amina la, right? It says, how do I know that what I'm saying is right, that it's not allowed? Because it says v'chen bagat. Right? The next part of the Mishnah adds another case. So why is it adding another case, and also in a wine press? It must be adding another case to add karmelit. The beginning of the Mishnah is talking about the Shut Echid and the Shut Rabim. And then it says, and also a Karmelit, which means if I'm, in one domain and the Karmelit and the wine press is a Karmelit, and it's still prohibited. That's my proof. Okay, from the extra case regarding wine press. How Rabba responds? Rabba Amar, Linyan Ma'aser. No, the wine press case has nothing to do with the laws of Shabbat. It's just giving another parallel about when I am drinking in such a manner, is it considered temporary drinking regarding ma'aser, as we'll explain in a second. V'chen amar Rav Sheshat, v'chen bagat linyan ma'aser, de'etnan. Shotin al hagat ben bechamin ben besonen ufatur, dibre Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Eliezer ben Sadok mechayev. Hachamim omrim al hachamin chayav, al hasonen patur. Okay, so the idea is as follows: when you have wine in a wine press, once you finish the process, then you cannot drink it at all until you bring ma'aser, right? You have to bring a tenth, and then you can start drinking it. However, if it's pre-processed, if it's just the raw material, and I'm still using it, then I am allowed to taste a little bit without taking ma'aser, right? Because it's not considered actually drinking. I'm just having a little snack, I'm just trying it out. and so that's permitted. But we even without even without drinking, even without taking the maaser. So the question here is, so the Mishnah anyway says, is talking about if I mix it with warm water or cold water. They never drank wine by itself because it was very strong. And so the first opinion of Meir says, whether I mix it with hot water or cold water, um, I'm allowed to drink it because it's temporary drinking. It's okay. The Bia says no. Once I start mixing it, you see, I'm already preparing it as a it's I'm processing it. So then it's no good. Hachamim make a distinction. They say if you prepare it with warm water. It's interesting. I guess they would have hot wine. I don't know if anybody has that. Like we have sake, it's hot, but that's not wine. So they, if you prepare with hot water, then you're gonna have to drink the whole thing. Whereas if with cold water, if you don't want any more, you can pour it back into the vat, because just cold water, warm water, you don't want to pour back into the vat because it will spoil the rest of it. So by putting with warm water, that shows I'm making it important. I'm finishing the process, so you can't do it that way. Okay, so anyway, the point is that according to the Bimeir, anyway, you are allowed to drink in a temporary way, even at the wine press. So now the question is, if I am in one area and I just lean over and drink a little from it, then it's permitted, right? So vechen bagat is not talking about the laws of Shabbat, and because I'm going to transfer from one place to the other, but just saying that I'm allowed to drink a little from the wine press. So it's a leniency regarding maaser. Actually, has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with the laws of Shabbat. It's just saying if I totally go into the wine press, then I'm really drinking. If I just lean over and taste a little, then it's called a snack and it's permitted. And that's therefore Rava says regarding karmelit, that karmelit is allowed because we don't make a gezerah ligzerah, and so we don't have to worry that I'm going to, even if I do transfer, it'll only be the Rabbanan, so I don't have to worry that I'm going to end up transferring the drink into my domain. Okay, and next Mishnah. Kolet adam min hamazchela lemata me'asara tevachim umin hasinor mikol makom shoteh. So again, another example of doing something in one domain that comes from another domain. So here I have a gutter of the house. I'll show you a better picture here. Right, my house has a gutter, and let's say it's raining, and I want to drink that water on Shabbat, right? Why not? Nice fresh water. So let's say I'm outside here in the Shut Rabim, and so the water is falling on the house, which is a Shut Yachid. But I'm not taking it from the house. I'm waiting here, and now it's going down and then dropping into my bucket, which is in the Shut Rabim. So I'm kind of benefiting from something that comes from the Shut Yachid, but I'm not transferring it myself. I'm just waiting for it to come to me. So is that okay or not? So the Mishnah says it's okay. You can collect the water from the gutter as long as you are below 10 tefachim, because that way, the below 10 tefachim is the Shut Rabim. You're in the Shut Rabim, so I'm not doing anything. I'm not transferring. Or from a sinor, this is a gutter, this is a leader, right? Or from a leader pipe, because the leader pipe then actually comes down, and generally a leader, the whole point of a leader, that is to bring it down close to the street. So as long as it's within 10 tefachim of the bottom, that is fine. I can fill up a bucket and use it. Okay. Yeah, okay, so that the Gemara is going to now make a distinction. That's the Mishnah. Mishnah is going to make a distinction. It says, Kolet in, ava mitzaref la. In the first case, regarding the gutter, I can collect it, I can catch it, but mitzaref, in other words, to put my hands and touch it to try to collect it, or my mouth, put it directly onto it, that would not be okay, right? I can only catch it after it comes down and separates. Why? My tama. אמר רב נחמן, הכה במזחלה פחות משלושה סמוך לגג עסקנן. דכל פחות משלושה סמוך לגג, כגג דמה. So why would that be a problem? Well, it must be that's talking about a case where this was, the gutter was close to the roof itself. And so less than 3 tefachim, so which means it's like lavud, it's actually part of the roof. And therefore, by touching it, I'm actually, connecting myself to the Reshut Yachid, and I'm standing in the Reshut Rabim, and so that would be, in fact, be transferring, right, from the Reshut Yachid to the Reshut Rabim. So I can't go very close to it because that would be considered transferring. That's why I have to go farther away, and I can't actually touch it itself. Okay, so it's making a diuk. The Mishnah says kolet and not mitzaref, right? Okay, so now it's hard to see where that's coming from in the Mishnah, but you can see where it's coming from as we go on, because we're going to quote a couple of baraitot that actually do make this distinction explicitly. Yeah. By the way, regarding when it comes to the pipe, this is mikol makom, right? Also deriving from that pipe, even if you're touching it or putting your mouth to it, is okay, because that's coming all the way down. Okay, Tanyana Mehachi, we have a braita that backs up this understanding that the distinction that Nachman just made, because it says Omed Adam b'shut hachid magbia yado lemala ma'asrat tefachim lefachot mishelosha samuch lagag vekolet ubelbad shelo yitzaref. Okay, the language here is a little confusing, and there's some manuscript differences. Let me just try to read it this way and show you then I'll explain why the manuscripts have different versions. So the Braita that says you can stand in the Reshut Hayachid. This is already different from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was talking about when you're standing in the Reshut Harabim. You're standing in Reshut Hayachid and you lift your hands up above 10 tevachim. Our Mishnah said below 10 tevachim, and you can do it close to 3 tefachim next to the roof, and you can collect in a bucket, but don't put your hands on it. So in other words, this looks like it's the opposite case, right? So here I'm in one Reshut Yachid and I want to try to capture water from my friends, from my neighbor's roof. And so if I do it high up and close to it, then I guess I'm using his own. I'm only transferring from the Reshut Hayachid to the Reshut Hayachid. It's not clear why then you couldn't also touch it, and it's actually the opposite case, not the same case as what came before. So for that reason, if you look in the manuscript version, it actually says not lemala ma'aseh tevachim, but lemata ma'aseh tevachim, below 10 tevachim. No, scratch that. Forget that. It doesn't say that. The difference is this b'shut hayachid. In the manuscript version, it says b'shut harabim in this case, which means that would be the same case, right? This would be the b'shut harabim, and this is also the b'shut harabim. And so I want to get something from there, and it says here kolet, but not mitzaref. You can get it, take it with a bucket after it falls, but you can't touch it directly. Okay, so that would make more sense. The lamala ma'aseh tevachim still doesn't make sense, and that is still problematic. There is a version of the Mishnah here that actually says lemala ma'aseh tevachim in this case, which then would make it all the same. Okay, there's a lot of manuscript variants, and I think you can see why, right? Because probably it did have lemala ma'asara, and therefore someone said it must not be Reshut Harabim, but rather Reshut Hayachid. Otherwise, why would you want it to be above? You generally, if you're in the Reshut Harabim, then you want it to be below 10 tefachim, so that you're in the same area as where you're catching it. Okay, so there's a lot of confusion here. Okay, to add one more level of confusion, we have another braita. It says Tanya idach, another version of this one, but just with in the negative. Lo ya'amod adam b'shut hayachid ve'yagbiya yado lemala ma'aseh tevachim lefachot mishelosha samuch lagag v'yisaref aval koleh tu v'yishteh. Saying the same thing as this one, just saying don't stand in a private domain and lift your hands up above 10. Too close to the neighboring the roof, within 3 tefachim of his roof, and touch it and grab onto it or put your mouth on it. But you can put a bucket there and thereby get it. So again, here, if you change the Reshut Hayachid to the Reshut Harabim, then I think this one actually makes a lot more sense. Do not lift, try to lift up and touch it when you're in the Reshut Harabim, and that's in the Reshut Hayachid, because then you're going to be transferring. But rather, go low down and catch it below 10 tefachim. So I think this one actually makes perfect sense in the manuscript version. This is the Oxford manuscript. It's considered the best manuscript of Masechet Eruvin. And and that would say the Reshut Harabim, and perhaps this one is simply a secondary version of the second Baraita that just flipped everything around, even though in this case it should probably say le mata me'asrat tefachim. Okay, I hope that was slightly clear. Anyway, the last thing, mina sinor mikol makom shoteh. So if it's a pipe that comes down, then you can drink in any way you want. Tana im yesh basinor arba'a asur mipnei shehu kemosi mereshut lereshut. The only distinction is if the pipe is itself 4 by 4, it's a big pipe, then it becomes its own domain, and that would be a problem because then you're taking it directly from the pipe and you're transferring from the pipe, which is the Reshut Yachid itself as 4 by 4, and transferring it to the Reshut Rabim, so that would not be good. But if it's a smaller pipe, then that is fine. Okay, finally, the last Mishnah for today. Bor b'shut harabim v'chulyato gavoa asarat tefachim chalon shal gabav malein hemenu b'Shabbat. So if I have a house, I'm inside the house, and outside the window there is a cistern that's in the Reshut Harabim. But the cistern doesn't go just down into the ground. It also has a lip around it, and the lip is 10 tefachim high. So that's good. By having a lip 10 tefachim high, that makes this all into a Reshut HaYachid. And so in such a case, no problem. I can simply transfer, I can stick my bucket out, and I can get water and bring it inside. Okay, that would be no problem. Similarly, if there was a pile of garbage right outside my window, then and there was 10 tefachim high, chalon shal gabav shofchin lotocha mayim b'Shabbat. So then I could take dirty water from inside my house and pour it onto the garbage pile, because the garbage pile is 10 high, and that would be okay also. All right, excellent. So B'mayaskinan, the Gemara asks, Ilema bismucha lama li chulya asara. Hold on, what's the case talking about? If the cistern is directly under the window, very, very close, then what's the point? Why do I even need this it to be high, an embankment that's high up? Because the cistern itself, we can assume, is 10 tefachim deep, and so 10 tefachim deep would also make it into a Reshut HaYachid. So I could just transfer directly. I don't really need the embankment around it. So what is the case? We're actually talking about where the cistern is 4 tefachim away from the window horizontally, and therefore, if there was no embankment, then I would be transferring, because I have my bucket. I put it into this Reshut HaYachid, which is the pit, and then I transfer it I transfer it through the Reshut Harabim, and then inside the house. If it's less than 4, then I can say, it's lavud, it's just connected. So that must be talking about a case where it's far away. All right, v'tamadika chulya asara, aleka chulya asara, kametatem Reshut Yachid, derech Reshut Harabim. So without it, then I'm transferring from a private domain, which is the cistern, to a private domain, which is my house, through Reshut Harabim, and that would not be good. Okay, that's one interpretation. No, I can even explain the Mishnah that's talking about that the pit is right up next to the window. And the point is to teach me that even if the pit was shallow, I'll tell you it was only 5 deep, that the embankment, I'll say, is 5 high, that the embankment is 5 high, and the one that's 5 below can add together to make a total of 10, and so it's considered a Reshut HaYachid, even if some of it goes up and some of it goes down, as long as it together adds up to 10. Okay, good. That's the cistern. Now the garbage pile. Ashpa b'Reshut Harabim. If you have a garbage pile outside your window, and so if you allow people, the person inside, to throw it out, don't you have to worry that one day they might clean up the garbage pile, and they might make it lower than 10 tefachim. And once it's lower than 10 tefachim, it's not a Reshut HaYachid anymore. And so then you're going to be a problem. So you know what we should say? You can never throw things out into the garbage pile, because one day it's going to be cleaned up, and then you won't be able, and then you're going to still throw it out, and you're going to violate. So why don't we do that? And we have a precedent for worrying about such a thing and prohibiting from the following story. שצידו אחד קלה לים וצידו אחד קלה לאשפה. ובא מעשה לפני רבי ולא אמר בו לא איסור ולא היתר. We had a case just like this, and here's a picture. Where we had a mavoy, right? So I have courtyards here that are open up to this alleyway. The alleyway is open on this side to the Shut Rabim, but it has two walls on the side. Well, they're not typical walls. On one side is a garbage pile that's 10 high, 10 tefachim high. On the other side is an embankment of a water source that goes down. It goes down 10 tefachim, so you still have a wall, right? That goes down. And so they came and they asked the rabbi, "Is this okay? Can we use this mavoy? We have a post here, so that's okay to enclose the area, the fourth wall to the Shut Rabim. So now we have a full enclosure, right? Is this okay?" So they came and asked the Rabbi, and the Rabbi would not give an answer. He would not tell them it's allowed. He wouldn't tell them it's not allowed. So why? What was he thinking? He didn't want to tell them that it's allowed because maybe the garbage pile will be taken away. That's the main point we need, right? We see in this case that we worry about garbage pile being taken away. So the same thing in our case. Or maybe the sea will throw up some sediment, and then the embankment will not be 10 tefachim deep. It will the sand will come up, and so therefore, since it might change, he doesn't want to tell them it's allowed right now, because then they're going to get used to using it, and they're not going to realize one day when the walls change. He couldn't tell them it's not allowed, because after all, right now it does have walls, so you can't tell them it's not allowed. Anyway, so that's our question. How come our Mishnah says that you can throw dirty water to a garbage pile outside your window? Shouldn't we worry that one day the garbage pile might get cleaned up and become less than 10? We answer, La kashya, hadi achid, hadi rabim. When in our Mishnah, we're talking, in that case, we were talking about a private garbage dump. And that's why a single person might decide to clean it up one day, and so you have to worry about it be cleaned up. Our Mishnah was talking about a public garbage dump, and a public garbage dump, who's going to clean it up? Nobody wants to take responsibility for it, and therefore then you can be sure, if you leave it up to the public, leave it up to the city, right, and it will never get picked up. So they had garbage pickup problems back then as well. Okay, Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen.